Today we are making homemade French bread. It is so good.
I have been making this recipe for over 30 years, as you could probably tell from the stains on the page. But this recipe comes from our family friend, LaVonne Boyce, who published it in our church cookbook, about maybe 30 to 35 years ago. So, Fabulous French Bread by LaVonne Boyce, and let's get to the ingredients. So, we're going to start with 2.5 cups of very warm water, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons or 2 packages of dry yeast, 1 tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of cooking oil, and then 6 cups of flour that's been stirred and pre-measured. And I'm going to leave the scoop here because we're only going to do 3 cups in the beginning and then we'll add the rest later. And then not required, but I recommend having an egg and some cornmeal that I will show you what we will do with those at the end just before we bake the bread. Now for this bread recipe, I actually just mix this by hand. I like to use my Danish dough whisk, or sometimes called a Swedish whisk. I have also used one of my favorite mixing spoons, or even just a wooden spoon. Any of these would work, whatever your preference. Of course, you could use your electric stand mixer with a dough hook, but this is just what I use. We're going to start by adding our 2.5 cups of very warm water. Then we're going to go ahead and add our yeast, and I usually let that sit 20 to 30 seconds, just enough to hydrate the yeast. I'm going to go ahead and stir in my sugar and just give it a little bit of a gentle whisk so it doesn't clump and stick to the bottom. And I do the same thing after I add my salt and then my cooking oil. Just want to break up any clumps of sugar or yeast that I might see before I go ahead and add my flour. Okay, once the yeast and the sugar and the other ingredients are mixed pretty well, I'll go ahead and start adding in my 3 cups of flour, and I like to stir in between each one just to make sure that all of the flour gets incorporated with the liquid mixture as well. Okay, after the first 3 cups of flour have been added and combined with the wet ingredients, I will go ahead and set my timer for about 3 minutes, and then I will beat vigorously for about 2 to 3 minutes or until I no longer see any big clumps of flour. Okay, so about 2 minutes has elapsed and I'm noticing there are no more clumps. I'm starting to see the bubbles come to the surface, which is just fine. It shows that the yeast is doing its thing, and yours should look like that. I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of my flour and just stir enough to incorporate it and make sure that it is combined well. You don't want to overmix this because otherwise you'll end up with a very dense, very heavy French loaf. And so that's one reason I like to use my Danish dough whisk, is just it helps it to not overmix. Okay, I'm going to speed this up a little bit, but just know that as you mix in the flour, you will start to notice the dough pull away from the sides of the bowl. It will still be sticky, but you will want it to pull away a little bit. So if your spoon can stand upright in the dough, then you know that it is done being mixed. So here, my first test, it is falling over, so I'm going to keep mixing. So after about another minute or two of mixing, my spoon is now standing upright in the dough. That's what we want. So I usually like to cover my bowl with a towel, and this is the point where we will let our dough rest for 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes has elapsed and the dough has risen a little bit, but it is still very sticky, and that's okay. You're going to take your spoon and just stir it down. What I'm looking for here are big bubbles that I want to sort of squash through the stirring process, and I want to make sure that I'm scraping my bowl as I stir, sort of just to punch it down with the spoon. And I'm going to do this for a couple of minutes until I feel like I've worked the whole ball of dough pretty well and gotten out all of the bubbles. Okay, so we're going to repeat this process of letting the dough rest for 10 minutes and then stirring it down for a total of 5 times. So we have 4 more to go, and I usually just like to keep track on a little scratch paper that I tape to my countertop so that I don't forget how many times I have let it rest and stirred it down. Okay, my dough has rested and been stirred down 5 times, and we are ready to roll it out onto a floured surface. I have just preheated my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. I have made sure my countertops are completely cleaned and completely dry. And I'm going to go ahead and spread a thin layer of flour just so that the dough won't stick to it. I will also lightly flour my rolling pin. As you think about the flour and kneading or rolling out the dough, keep in mind that you only want to add the minimal amount of flour needed to keep the dough from sticking. You do not want to add in too much flour or you will end up with a very heavy, dense loaf of French bread, and you do not want that. So as I'm kneading the dough again, I'm just adding enough flour to make sure it's not sticky, and I'm also trying to get rid of any air bubbles that I'm noticing. Once I feel like it's no longer sticky and there are no more air bubbles, then I will cut this into 2 even balls of dough and I will be ready to roll each one out. As you roll this out onto your floured surface, you'll want to make a large rectangle, maybe 17 by 11 or even a little larger if you would like. Again, if you find a little stickiness happening, go ahead and just sprinkle a little bit more flour as needed. Careful not to add too much. Okay, now I'm just going to start at the long edge and I'm going to roll like a jelly roll fashion into one big log, and I'm going to tuck each end under. I don't worry too much if it's a little misshapen. That's totally fine. I feel like that's what gives it the homemade look anyway. So I've lined my baking sheet with some parchment paper, and this is where I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of cornmeal on it. If you don't have parchment paper, you can certainly just use shortening or butter or oil to lightly grease your pan and then add the cornmeal. This just helps prevent the dough from sticking to the pan. And then I'm going to repeat the process with my second ball of dough, preparing my second loaf of French bread. After I had rolled both loaves, I put them on my prepared pan and covered them and let them rise for about 30 minutes at room temperature. So now I'm just going to crack a whole egg into a little bowl and give it a little bit of a whisk. Just lightly beaten is fine. And unlike a wash I would use for a pie pastry, I'm not going to add water to this. I'm just going to leave it undiluted, and then I will brush the egg on both loaves of the French bread. So before I go ahead and brush this on, I'm first going to make 3 diagonal slashes or gashes across the top of each loaf. I'm going to use my bread knife, but you can use any serrated knife that you have. And essentially, when French bread hits a hot oven, the yeast will produce a surge of gas known as oven spring, and the dough has to expand somewhere. So you want to score it with these 3 gashes so that your loaf won't tear in random spots. So I'm just going to go ahead and brush this egg on generously across the top and the sides of both of these loaves. And this is going to help give that nice golden color to the loaf and help it bake evenly as well. One of my loaves, I'm going to make a garlic cheese loaf. So I'm going to sprinkle some Parmesan cheese and some of this garlic cheese seasoning to the top. You could even do jalapenos and cheddar cheese on the tops if you want. I've done that before and it's really good. You could even do like everything bagel seasoning or rosemary and thyme, or even like a dried dill weed. That would be good too. Okay, these are ready for the oven. Again, 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, once the bread comes out of the oven, I like to brush melted butter on the warm loaves just to help keep the bread soft and also gives a little bit of added flavor. Okay, you guys, my kitchen smells so good right now, and don't these loaves of French bread look so good? Even better is that they taste amazing too. I hope you give LaVonne's fabulous French bread a try. Seriously, you won't regret it.